Hello, 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 and welcome. First and foremost, Happy New Year! My first live of 2019. Ooh, 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 ooh. But before I continue, just in case you don't know me, my name is Nina Dafe, and I'm the founder and the editor of the Far Above Rubies Collection.com, where I help heart-centered, visionary Christian women to banish the blocks that are keeping them from basically achieving their business goals once and for all. Okay, so if you're just jumping on this live or if you're watching in the replay, welcome, welcome, welcome. Now today I'm really going to be kind of in a way piggybacking off of what I talked about last week. So last week we were in Genesis 30 and we were talking about how to find your why, right, when it comes to goal setting and stuff like that. Today I'm going to be talking about how to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And what got me basically thinking about this was kind of continuing to delve into Genesis 30. If you're unfamiliar with what happens in Genesis 30, what the story is, I went through the whole thing in last week's live. You're free, obviously, to go off and read it. But essentially, in summary, what happens is, Jacob, by this point, he has married two sisters, Leah and Rachel. He really wanted to marry Rachel, but his dad was basically a bit of a, well, not his dad, Leah and Rachel's dad, his uncle, was a bit of a trickster and basically inadvertently kind of forced him to marry Leah without his knowledge. Ends up marrying Leah, continues to stay there because he wants to marry Rachel. By this point, he has achieved his goal. Now, the sad thing about this is that, Rachel is then obviously his favorite wife. Leah feels it. And because she's essentially not loved, forsaken, God opens her womb. And, by the time we get to Genesis 30, she's actually had, I think, about 4 boys. Whereas at this point, Rachel is infertile and hasn't been able to have any kind of children. And as the chapter goes on, like literally, they're having this war, basically, of who can have the most kids. What I found the most interesting about it all is the methods that they employed. Hey to you guys who are joining, say hi in the comments, let's interact. But yeah, what I found the most interesting is the means that they both chose to have kids. So, Leah was able to have them naturally, but once she saw she had stopped producing children, she gave Jacob her handmaid, her bondservant, basically. And Rachel, when she saw it, she actually was just not conceiving at all, did the same thing, gave her husband her maid. And I did sit there and I thought, where have we seen this before? And of course, it's Sarah, right? Sarah did the exact same thing when she saw that she wasn't getting pregnant and producing this promised child that God had said that, they were essentially going to have. She tried to put matters into her own hands and, then, say to Abraham, well, sleep with my maid, we'll have a child by her, right? And I thought it was just really, really interesting because, if you've been following along, then you realize that Jacob is actually Abraham's grandson. So I'm like, okay, so this wasn't a Sarah and Abraham thing. This is clearly something that has become, a bit of a culture, a bit of a tradition amongst this family. And then also again, the fact that I said that Jacob was actually tricked by his uncle. Hey guys, the fact I said that Jacob was actually tricked by his uncle, hey Clarissa, oh my gosh, it's so nice to have you. But yeah, the fact that I say that Jacob was actually, tricked by his uncle and everything like that. If you go back into, Jacob's history, you know, his uncle and his mother, Rebecca, are actually siblings, and she happened to trick his dad into giving him, you know, like the blessing and stuff. So all this thing about swapping maids to have children and hey, it's nice to have you, seriously. But yeah, all this thing of like swapping maids and trickery and all of that sort of stuff, I'm realizing as I'm reading, oh my gosh, these are not, you know, isolated events. This is literally like the tradition and the culture of the family that's kind of been passed down. And so it just kind of really made me think, you know, a lot of the times when they were doing these things, it was almost their way of helping God. Like they'd been given the promise of, you know, you're going to be father of nations, you know, you're going to have lots of children, be fruitful and multiply, and, you know, this, that, and the other. But each of them in this family just had this habit of taking things into their own hands in order to force it and to kind of make it happen. And it just really made me think, oh my gosh, you know, if we're thinking about us as modern women, you know, heart-centered visionary women who also have visions and plans, I'm sure we have goals and dreams for 2019. How many of us are maybe perhaps on the cusp or are guilty of kind of doing very similar to like the people in this family, which is essentially God has kind of given us a vision, you know, God has, you know, said, you know, given us the green light and the go ahead and told us what it is that we're supposed to do. But because we don't have a plan or a strategy from him yet, or we're not quite sure, you know, how it's going to be birthed, we kind of try to do it in our own strength. Okay, so that's number one. Don't do that. Don't try to do things in your own strength. We talked about that extensively when we were talking about Sarah, right? But then I thought about the other thing, number two, which is that, you know, like I said, these people, you know, it's easy to look, you know, sometimes at other people, whether past or present, and kind of go, oh, you know, start judging and, oh, they should have known better, etc., etc. But I can put myself in their position and go, well, actually, especially if it's tradition, especially if it's culture, especially if it's what they have been raised with, perhaps they didn't. And it was really just a matter of them renewing their mind in order to properly come into agreement, in order to birth and bring forth the goals and the dreams that God had given them. And it just reminded me of, you know, Instagram video, an IGTV video that I'd done last year, where literally I was talking about the fact that, you know, in order to fulfill my goals and dreams, I knew that God was pushing me to become more visible, and he was pushing me to share more and to testify more about just the revelations and stuff that he was giving me. And yet, coming from a Nigerian background where you're always told, no, you know, keep, you know, your stuff to yourself, you know, it's private, you know, you don't know about people's bad mind and bad eyes, and, you know, how they might be jealous of you and want to do something and this, that, and the other. So you don't share so openly, you know, when good things happen to you, or, you know, whatever the case may be, because you don't want to kind of provoke those things. And that was very much a tradition and a cultural belief and a limiting mindset that I had to nip in the bud in order to fall in line with the goal, the dream, and the vision that God had given me. Okay, and so this is what I am talking about with regards to how just reading about these two women, Rachel and Leah, really kind of inspired this whole thought of, at the end of the day, not only should we not take things into our own hands and try to do things by human strength, but if we are going to come into agreement with God, that we need to basically, number one, in order to transform our minds by the transform our lives by the renewing of our minds, well, the first thing is we need to come into agreement with his word. That means we actually need to read it. That means we actually need to know it, because the Bible says at the end of the day that faith, you know, to be able to do what God says that you should do and to become the person that he says that you are, actually, it has to come by those things. You know, faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word. So that's number one. You transform your mind by spending time in his presence and by spending time with him. So you can actually allow him to unpick, you know, those kind of cultural traditions, beliefs, you know, those values that you grew up with that maybe need to be left in the past and are not serving you anymore. Okay, so that's number one. The other thing as well that has definitely been valuable to me in my own life is if I've not had positive examples within my own sort of circle, whether it's family, close friends, or the people that I've grown up with, you know, my community, of how to do a particular thing, you know, whatever it may be, whatever your 2019 goal may be, whether it's to start a business, whether it's to be better with money, hey Nien, whether it's to be better with money, thank you, I'm glad that's resonating with you, you know, whatever the case may be, then you're going to need to learn outside of your inner circle. I think part of what went so wrong, you know, with Rachel, Leah, Jacob, and all of these people, all of the descendants of Abraham, yes, they had his blessings, but to a certain degree, they also had his curses, right? His generational curses because of what was passed down, you know, and so it becomes then, you know, imperative for us to search and see, oh my gosh, hang on, what are some of the things that I've maybe been brought up with? What are some of the things that I've maybe seen growing up that I do not want to carry forward? And also, if I don't want to carry this thing forward, clearly there aren't people within my immediate circle that I can learn from. So who do I know or know of that is successful at this thing, you know, that I can learn from in order to then become successful at it myself? So, you know, when we think about mentors, you know, I think sometimes we tend to think about people within our own circle, but it is possible, for example, for someone in the online space, you know, to be a mentor by following their content. It is possible to read an expert's book or to join an online community and to then glean from their expertise. So literally you can be transformed by the renewing of your mind through the Bible, through relationship with God, through prayer, etc. Yes, but then marrying the spiritual with the practical, you know, by also studying to show yourself approved, as the word says. So reading books on the subject, you know, attending events, seminars where they're actually teaching on this thing. As I said, online platforms, online communities, Facebook groups, you know, whatever the case may be, so that in learning the new skills from the people who are successful in the field that you want to be in, whether that's business wise, money wise, weight loss, whatever your goals are for 2019, in learning those goals and those skills, you then are able to unlearn and unpick those traditions, those limiting beliefs, those cultural values that you have grown up with that no longer serve you. Because what's very interesting as well is we saw the same thing once again with Sarah, where, you know, she tried to force, you know, things in her life and play God and try to bring forth a child through Hagar, and yet still that child that was brought forth through Hagar was not the promised child. It had to come through her, and she had to do the inner work, and she had to do the inner healing and the inner learning in order for that to come to pass. And we see that also with Rachel particularly, because in the beginning of Genesis 30, she's literally cussing Jacob out, talking about, you need to give me some kids. Do you know what I mean? And then, as I said, she did the same thing. She gave him her maid, you know, for him to sleep with and for him to do certain things with, so that she could then, you know, get the child that she wanted. And yet it wasn't until years later, and all the competing with her sister and all of that sort of jazz, that, you know, she then finally had Joseph. And of course, we all know the story of Joseph and who he was and how important he ended up being to the children of Israel, and how much he was just such a blessing. First of all, sent by God, but he was actually blessed by God as well, and that was the one child that she was given by God without forcing his hand, versus, when she was trying to, and also trying to like compare to Leah. So as much as she was kind of like, oh, well, Leah's got this and Leah's got that, we're not talking about any of Leah's children. It's Joseph that we always reference, right? And so literally I say all of that to say that, when we allow our minds to be renewed, when we surrender to God and we don't try to force his hand and do it in our own strength, and we take the time to do the personal development and the inner work, basically, to come into alignment with who he says that we are, in order to actually manifest our goals and our dreams and all of that sort of jazz. Even if it takes us ages, even if everyone seems to be running ahead of us, whatever the case may be, doing it God's way is always going to be the most blessed. And I think that's also another transformation that needs to take place as well. Like, especially in this age of social media, the comparisonitis, etc., etc., we can feel behind, and we can feel like we need to catch up, or whatever the case may be. But I think I said the same thing last week. Maybe this is the word for 2019, but just stay in your lane, lovely. Stay in your lane, stay close to God, stay, listen out for what he's saying to you, and you will then birth your Joseph. In other words, you will birth your purpose. You will birth exactly what he said that you would have. You will achieve your goals and your dreams in 2019. Okay. Now, I hope that all made sense. For those of you who stuck with me, thank you so much. Let me know in the comments what your biggest aha moment was, your biggest takeaway, and we can keep the dialogue going. If you're watching the recap or the replay, still do the same thing, because as you guys know, I will circle back and reply to what your comments are. But before I go, lovelies, I just also wanted to let you know that I have opened the Miracle Mindset Makeover for heart-centered Christian women who want to finally banish the blocks that are keeping them from achieving their goals in 2019 once and for all. I've talked about how important renewing your mind is. I've talked about the fact that, at the end of the day, the achievement of our goals first has to be in our thoughts before we can manifest it as a reality. I've talked about how important the word of God is, because faith comes by hearing, and hearing from the word, in order to transform your life, right? The Miracle Mindset Makeover will help you to do all of those things. You'll receive daily downloads of Bible verses, and, it'll help you basically to unpick those things that have been blocking you all of this time, so that you can move forward. Not only that, it's a sisterhood, it's an online community, so you'll have support and you'll have accountability as well. So if that's something that sounds like your cup of tea, like it's right up your alley and all that sort of jazz, then click the link in the caption if you're watching on Facebook, and if you're watching on YouTube, then click the link in the description box below. Okay. Oh, I forgot to say, it's free for 7 days, so there's no kind of monetary commitment or anything like that. We all love freeness and freebies. You're welcome. So guys, thank you for sticking with me. Of course, I'll be back again next week. Happy New Year again. I wish you a blessed one. And yeah, take care. See you next week. Bye.